Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know the final episode of Silo Season 2. My name is Mike Bloom, and we are here to talk about a quite literally explosive finale as we start setting our watches for the interminable off season between seasons 2 and 3 of Silo, though we know there will be a season 3. And there should, because there was a lot left in the lurch. And someone to break down that lurch with me is someone who basically is the equivalent of a Pez dispenser from a corner store, and that she is always a gift, no matter the occasion. Grace Leeder.
Oh, that's so nice. I wasn't sure how that sentence was going to end, but I'll take that version. Yeah. I'm a duck. That's me, Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm so glad that in a show that's all about people's identities being unmasked, we finally got this out of you, Grace. No foul behavior from you, or
Nope.
is there?
That's right. No, I do quack a lot on podcasts, talk a lot, but yeah. Silo, the season finale, Mike. It happened.
Here we go, into the fire. And look, you were someone that certainly offered some hot takes throughout the season. And I think one of the larger ones being something that you and I discussed a lot, which is sort of the wavering quality, structure, plotting of the season. Of course, there's a lot of eyes on the season finale. You and I both really liked last episode, and so we thought, okay, maybe this is going to be a really nice, step up into the final step up and forward for what's to come in Silo. Did that step meet for you? What did you make ultimately of the final hour we got of Silo season 2?
Yeah, I will say I don't know that I don't know that it kept pace with the last episode. I feel like we go into more. There's moments in this episode that I think are tremendous, and there's a lot of scenes that I'm excited to chat through about why I think that they worked and they were so effective. But I thought overall, it mostly felt like, unfortunately for supporting actor Ian Glenn, that not a lot happened. Like, that's pretty dismissive to his character, literally jumping on a bomb.
He was the bomb.com.
Mm-hmm. The only doctor they had, they have killed.
Well, listen, Hank was the one that was offering himself up. He's like, listen, man, one of these co-hosts picked me in their death draft last week. Like, let me do it. He's like, no, you're in the main cast. I'm still a recurring cast member. I'll take the pay cut.
Yeah. So I think between just the way the sort of like final rebellion happens, and also I feel like Lucas really gets the short end of the stick here, in terms of not really getting much at all in the finale. The Sim stuff is fine. The Solo and Juliette stuff I think is really great. The Bernard stuff, really great. Like, there's a lot in here that I think is really good. It's just that overall, I think it's very emblematic of the season as a whole, where I think in every episode there's stuff I really like, and there's stuff that I'm like, I guess we're hanging out here for a bit,
Yeah, I mean, I was both surprised and not surprised with how much they crammed into this episode. I think there were certainly some things that we wagered last week that ended up paying off, right? We knew that there would be a skirmish that would eventually turn violent, that things would spill over quite literally into mechanical. We had figured that, okay, now that Juliette has her suit back and it seems like Silo 17 is united, she's going to go over that hill. But I think this is also the time when we sometimes remember that there are so many people in this cast as well. And it did feel like there's a little bit of mouths to feed in that occasion. We had to tie up the Walker is a mole storyline. We need to figure out what's going on with the Simses. And I agree, it does kind of come at the cost of an odd balance in someone like Lucas, who became such a prominent character, especially last episode, kind of just declined into a shell of a person because, I mean, maybe he was sort of understandably shell-shocked by the news, which now is pretty much out in the open, right? Even though we don't get a scene of the algorithm saying it, basically it's that he was told, or he figured out what the safeguard was, which is like, hey, there's something or someone behind the scenes that at any point in time can like press a button, release a whole bunch of poisonous gas, and kill us all. We are all playthings of something or someone in the background. And it unfortunately caused Lucas to kind of just recede into the background. And Bernard did as well from a certain perspective. So it's interesting. I feel like there were certain moments of this episode that were propulsive, some that were a little bit halting, some were propulsive and then halting, like, oh my God, stupid Patrick Kennedy is really going to lead people out of the silo, misguided by the propaganda. Okay, here's Juliette to save the day. But I do think when we look ahead to season 3 of Silo, I am intrigued because it really seems like, much like the magnifying glass that killed Juliette's mother and started a lot of the journeys for our characters here in the silo, it feels like the lens has shifted. And I'm excited to see what season 3 of Silo can look like now that it seems that things have maybe subsided for the time being. We're not, as Juliette herself will say, we're not at war with ourselves. We're at war with them, capital T.
Yeah, I do like that. I do think when I look at the sort of the story that they clearly tried to tell over the course of the season, I think it's one that makes sense, and it's actually it's a good story of the rebellion happening inside Silo 18, while you have Juliette, who has survived and is trying to figure out a way to basically get back to stop them from doing the thing that would kill them all. And now there's this added thing of like, maybe even if you get back, there is still something that would cause you to like that like you're still within the rule of somebody and something else, because of they have the safeguard. I think that that's a totally good story. I just think that, like, I don't think that every piece of getting there was satisfying, but I would agree with you that where we end everything at the end of season 2 does feel like a satisfying place to set up what is to come. And I think that they do that pretty effectively in probably what I think is one of the better parts of the episode as well, is this flashback seemingly that we get at the end of the episode. So we'll talk about that. But for the most part, I think that the episode, yeah, again, it's just a little bit of like hits and misses for me, of like I don't think, and even the things that don't work, it's not that they're like it's awful and I hate it. It's just that I think that there's better stuff that they could be doing. So yeah.
All right, so let's sort of break this down in chunks, and I guess we can sort of silo 17 and
Mm.
get it sort of out of the way, because even though, again, it seemed like there is this new community that has been forged with Solo letting these, troubled teens into the legacy to have them all settle into this new normal. So a little bit of trouble in paradise. This friggin' Andre, despite the fact that they found their food, still can't let Eater go at this point, and it takes a very, snap out of it talking to by Juliette to basically realize, hey, you've been struggling on your own for so long. Learn to embrace other people, please. They're not the enemy here. The enemy is literally everything else around you. The air outside is the enemy. This girl Eater is not the enemy.
I like this a lot. I think that this is a thing that feels very resonant, right? I think especially in I mean, it's for a very long time this has been a little bit of how things work, but I feel like especially show I am feeling right now. I mean, you again, I'm going to talk about like modern politics and modern happening, but there was an election that you had in the United States where I will say the party that I did not want you to vote in did win, but they wielded grievances, finding people where you could put the blame on instead of to basically hide the fact that there are rich corporations and these people are trying to turn America into an oligarchy. They've successfully managed to make people yell at other people rather than them, and I feel like this moment, while it's a little bit clumsy to get here, like in this final moment of Juliette giving this empowered speech of like, don't hate like her, hate the people who put you in this silo. That's who you should be mad at. That's who you should do. And this idea, I thought it was really good in the fact that like they have this thing of like, you're leaving us, like, and she's saying, well, no, like I got to go back to the people, like those are my people over there, like I got stuck with those people and I have to figure out how to help them. I really liked this moment between Juliette and Audrey and Eater. Oh, did she land on a new name? I can't remember by the end
Oh,
of
her
the
name
episode.
is Hope. She went with the
Oh,
name that her mom gave
I
her, which
like
was
that.
like a little bit of you know how sometimes people name their kids like John Smith in the hopes of becoming a Smith back in medieval times. It's like, all right, we need some hope right now. So quite literally, hope you're gonna carry on.
Uh-huh.
And then little did this poor mother, may she rest in peace, know that like some shit would go awry, and then she'd be labeled with the nickname Eater and become
Yeah.
like the veritable butt monkey of this group of rowdy kids
Yeah.
for the foreseeable future. I mean, it's also really sets up Juliet's arc moving forward. I also wonder how much of this is influenced from what she and Solo find out. First, I will say Steve Zahn continues to be the MVP of the season for me, with just the genuine tenderness he brought to returning to his apartment for the first time, to the point where he quite viscerally sees his parents in the corner. I think that was a really great way to get in his head, as well as they try to piece together like fragments of paper all of these jagged memories as to, okay, what did his parents do to stop the safeguard?
Mhm.
And that's something that I think we're going to take care of more in season 3. It turns out that, I don't know if it's just like a big old cap they put over a pipe, but it seems like they were able to stop the silo from being poisoned. But I think, at least from my perspective, that puts the idea in Juliet's head, less so to be like, I've got to protect my people from Bernard and from harming themselves, and more so, I've got to protect my people from whatever is making this all happen.
Yeah. So one thing that this is a little bit different. It's not on the whole so much different than what happens in the books, but it is different, certainly. Lucas plays much more of a role in the thing, and so by the Juliette is going back mostly because she knows that somebody's about to leave the silo. I found that the piece where like at the last minute Solo remembers the safeguard being a thing and then being like, hey, the safeguard, and so that is lets Juliette have a moment with Bernard before the end of the episode, I thought to be really jammed in here in a way that I don't think I really needed. I think that there is a way. I think that the notion of Juliette going back to stop people from leaving is so enough. I guess we have to talk through whether the Solo. I love the scene of Solo in his apartment. This to me did the thing that I thought was really well done from before, where that I talked about in the books, where the moment where like Juliette just realized how like shunted Solo is as somebody who's lived by himself for so long. I just really like the notion of him like seeing kind of like living in this moment as he is now, but seeing the
Yeah.
flashback of his family. I thought this was really well done. I just don't love the like, oh yeah, the safeguard, so that he gets into Juliette, so Juliette has a thing to talk to Bernard about. I thought that was maybe clunky, but otherwise, I think most of this stuff works for me. The scene of Solo, like they think Solo's taken the suit and he's actually just testing it to make
I'll
sure,
say
and he's
I
recognizing
don't
himself. You don't
I
like
don't like
that?
that, because I feel like it was sort of done as a purposeful bait and switch to be like, oh, he still might be dangerous or he still might be wacky. Oh no, he was actually testing the suit. Like, it's a cute moment, but like there was a part of me that rolled my eyes being like, if they really wrote Solo at the last second to be like, nope, I gotta go myself, or like, I really don't want you to go. Like, I think they showed the true metamorphosis in the last episode, to the point where, to start this episode, Juliette is calling him Jimmy, and he is
Yeah.
responding to Jimmy. Like, he has fully embraced who Jimmy is. And we talked about this last week, how I think he was so adamant about the fact that he is Solo because he was purposely pushing that identity out. He was pushing down any history he had with that name. And so now the fact that he's embracing it is awesome, to the point where I don't know if we necessarily needed the red herring of, oh my God, what is he doing? But it did lead to that really fun moment where she goes to hug him and he flinches initially. He does go back and hug her after when he says goodbye to her. But I think that's a really interesting moment from Juliette's perspective as well, because we talk about this all the time, right? How she is not necessarily someone to show that form of physical tenderness, I would say, towards a lot of people, especially post George. But the fact that like she hugs Solo after he tests her suit out is, to me, speaking towards the very odd sibling-esque dynamic that has been fostered between them since the very beginning, which, as we've talked about with Julia's familial history, is something that she kind of has always wanted for such a long time.
The scene last week where they kind of can't look at each other was apparently entirely improvised. It was not written that way.
Whoa!
So I believe Hugh Howey has said the scene isn't written that way. The actors are in their characters' heads, and the scene totally broke them. It's genuine stuff. You can feel it when you watch it. Love that they used that take. I think I get the sense of like the Bates, which I guess I never like, sorry to say if you felt I didn't fall for it. I guess I never, it's happened so quickly. It's not like we leave it on a cliffhanger. It's kind of just like, it's very quickly that it gets resolved that he did the suit. And actually, I feel like there's a world where you could say like, they kind of do the same beat 3 times in a row, where they kind of like, it's like Julia and Solo having like an emotional moment together. Cause we get it last week, we get it after the suit, and then we get it when she's going to leave. and it feels like the same, but I actually think there is a little bit of a difference in them, in which last week the emotional thing is him asking her, like, when you found the suit, why didn't you just leave? And she's saying, like, basically doesn't say, but it's basically like, I wasn't going to leave you. And now this is his, in a very, I think, little brother way of being like, you did something for me, so I got to do something for you. Like, I got to show you that I can do something for you, in a very cute way. And then I feel like the last moment is them both actually like being in the place where they can both accept each other, the love that they have for each other and what they're trying to do, and they sort of fuck. I think that I really like it. I think it's I might also just be looking for things that I did like versus things that I didn't like. So maybe I'm higher on it than I should be, but I like the sequence of like Jimmy taking the suit, but it's only because he was testing it. I think it's sweet.
I also did like, before we move on from Silo 17, in Juliet's entire monologue to Audrey, right? Of like, don't be mad at her, be mad at the system. When she talks about, not us, not her. All we're trying to do is survive, but the only way we can do that is by trusting the other people stuck in the same shit as we are. And she talks about how she has to go back for her people, my friends, my family, my dad. And it hits on multiple levels, not only because obviously her dad is really the only casualty from a name basis.
She was like, I love my dad. He's the bomb. He's the best.
But I do think that it hits Audrey specifically because, as we recall from last week's story, right, that it was her dad and Rick's mom that had fallen in love, helped produce this sort of found family, and they were the ones that were killed. And so I think it's Juliette basically telling her, like, you are holding this grudge towards Eater because of what happened to your dad. Please do not, allow me to not undergo the same tragedy as you, which again is so interesting considering the age dynamic as well. That seems like Silo 17. Now, I imagine, again, if season 3 is to be imagined as a like, okay, all for one, let's try to unite as a silo to take down whoever's in charge of all this malarkey. Silo 17 is not going to be completely out of the picture. You can't keep a good Steve Zahn down. So I think in all the promises that Juliette did about trying to come back and help them will come true.
Yeah. We'll get to the scene at the very end, but we leave off from what I've read. So I am very intrigued in terms of like what the rest of the show looks like, because basically, we get to the points that from the book. It's pretty close. Other than I'm just a little annoyed that we cliffhanger the like fire air pod thing, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, if only they had AirPods, and they could have
gone
pretty far away from the silo to communicate. Right. It's got pretty good distance on them. So let's go to Silo 18, and let's start as we usually do in the deep down. So Grace, like, I can't say we were right. I can't say we were wrong necessarily. Something was afoot that Knox going to Walker and being like, okay, this is the real plan. We thought it was a lure for her, that he had clocked that she was the mole. And so he was purposely feeding her and therefore Bernard false information so they could actually do something else. Not completely true, just 1 degree removed in that Walker was also in on it. We realized that Grace, much like the best, third base coaches, she has her own ornate series of hand signals. And so she was actually the one that was communicating to Knox before Knox even clocked anything, like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm trying to serve as this undercover person, but I'm actually working for you. This is how we can make things work. And listen, did that make up for necessarily the fact that we had this pretty badass Braveheart scene of like Knox and Shirley holding pipes, charging into battle, and then all of a sudden we see them get arrested? No, not necessarily, but I would say I can't say I still enjoy the storyline overall, but at least it was like somewhat of a satisfying payoff to not have Walker so glassy-eyed with the love goggles on that she does completely betray everyone around her.
Yes. So there's parts of this that I like and parts of it that I don't like. On the parts that I don't like is it feels a little cutesy, and I do have to sort of like be like, because I really like the idea that if you're working a mechanical and it's so loud all the time that you would have other ways to communicate, and then that could be used again. Like, and it's a really good example of the way that like Bernard would never be able to understand this because he doesn't care about what happens
Yeah.
below. Like that thematically is really, really good. It does feel when they do the flashback of like, this is the way we did the symbols. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll go along with it. It's fine. So I like it thematically a lot. I think it is probably better that Walker isn't somebody who has just succumbed to, like, there was never a moment that she was ever going to sell out the rest of the folks. I'm not totally, against the idea that that's the way it would have been, but I think it's totally fine the way it plays out in terms of the decoy plan of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's maybe like one too many scenes of everybody being like even when Walker and Carla reunite, like they do that before she goes to see Bernard, before she's revealed it, but it's this moment and she's like, no, how dare you? And like they have to do that to play it up in front of this other guy Rick so that she can go to like it's a little like, again, the thing I feel the most about the show is I think that they struggle the most when you can feel them trying to stretch out content or like add content that's not exactly how it is from the book. And I don't think that they're like A+ in that effort. But overall, again, I think thematically, the fact that Bernard could have never caught on to what was happening because he's from up top and doesn't really care. And it's a mechanical like community thing that gets him through it. I like that.
Yeah, and the idea as well that as Walker will show through dumping her knapsack out with all of the deputies' badges, that like this is basically everyone in the silo against Bernard, right? That through
Right.
Billings spreading a message via the Simses that essentially they're going to get everyone from up top to down deep, essentially working together in this multi-step plan. I think that's what made it kind of fun in a heist-like way, was finding out in retrospect all these people that are involved and how they were kind of in on it. There are still some people that I have questions about if they were in on it, like Kathleen Billings. Did she have to go along with like her poor husband getting dragged away and like, well, he's probably going to get tortured. Goodbye. I'm assuming so, considering that he did bring her into the whole Page thing. Maybe he just felt bad after the fact. But even like, the secretary for the sheriff's department, or
Mhm.
one of like the main deputies who ends up dismissing Amundsen and then ends up freeing everybody. It was all a very carefully laid trap for the coup de grace, which had one little stitch in it. We'll talk about the sacrifice of Pete, but essentially it was all about, all right, let's get ourselves arrested because they're going to have this big old detention center up top. They're going to take us out of our homes, but that's exactly where we want them, because then we are going to blow up a vital piece of the staircase, which is the only conduit to get through the silo. And we have the numbers and we have the real estate. And even though we are a little bit away from our comfort zone, we can certainly make this our comfort zone.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't mind. I mean, yeah, again, it is a little like to like sort of do this plan where then they all get like arrested immediately, but then they get bailed out. It's okay. It's totally fine. But yeah, overall I think this is pretty effective. And obviously we get from the very beginning this moment of like Peter, Juliet's dad, being brought into the plan. Again, I think it's like probably silly that that's who they like who ends up doing it, but it's fine. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what did you think ultimately about losing this character? I mean, I've talked about how he is one of the most tragic characters on the show, if not one of the most tragic characters I can remember in recent memory, considering everything he has lost, including for a while believing that he has lost his own daughter. Though maybe this fact that he got from Shirley via Lucas about the fact that she was alive last time they saw her does fill him with initiative of like, okay, I have been rebelling in certain ways, in the ways that I've been able to help people that have kind of become casualties of this little war that Bernard has been staging. Now is a way for me to actually serve as a weapon here, quite literally, in
Mhm.
deciding to make the sacrifice play and blow myself up. I mean, what I will say is that Ian Glenn, always a masterclass, and he does so here through his final moments when he delivers, his big speech with his downtrodden look and his puppy dog eyes, basically being like, if you see Juliette, give this watch to her, tell her that she's been perfect. She's always been perfect, which, considering how estranged the two were through her exile from the silo, it's a very heartening gesture and all the more tragic that he doesn't get the opportunity to tell her that himself.
Yeah, I think it's that part of it is like extremely strong in the sense of that basically they're estranged for so long, mostly because like everything happens with her brother and her mom, and she goes down to mechanical, and they don't talk for forever, and she like he the flame keepers of it all in terms of him deciding to do something that will keep Juliette's like what she's doing alive, I think is like without somebody doing it, it will fail. Like they will like the decoy plan is in motion. If they don't blow up the stairs, the whole thing falls apart. And so someone has to go do it. And I think it is I think quite good thematically that it ends up being Juliette's dad, who is the one who sacrifices himself to make sure that the rebellion can actually happen, and all the way to the point where like Juliette ends up being able to stand in front of the sign telling people not to go outside. Like I think it's like pretty fitting. I also like the thematic thing of not just that it's the bomb, but it's the blowing up the stairs, like the access to like cutting off the top levels from the rest of the silo is very good thematically as well. So
Yeah, because I think as well, that is sort of like the main totem of Silo, right? I mean, this is something that gets used in the credits, is the spiral staircase leading up and down. It represents, again, a way for this community to be connected and serves as this final reminder of, at that moment, how how fractured yet simultaneously united they are, right? The
mhm.
fact that we have been through Bernard's propaganda machine, kind of substrated into various groups of people pitted against each other. But at the end of the day, we are all working together to try to take down Bernard because we believe he's been lying to us and we deserve the right to go outside. I mean, it's going to be really interesting because obviously we'll see what does this mean moving forward. I mean, there's going to be certainly enough resources within the first 90 floors to allow them to subsist, but this creates obviously a very large problem getting from one area to another, especially if like that generator's on the fritz. That's going to
Mm.
be very difficult, Grace, but at least it's not exploded.
Um, yeah, I feel like it's the stairs are really symbolic in season 1 too, when like John's and the deputy, who I'm forgetting
So,
his name, but
yeah, and Mards, and that's the thing as well, is that there's a little bit of like hand wavy plot holy stuff. Where if you remember, it took Marnes and Johns multiple days to go down and go back up from the sheriff's department down to mechanical, and is the assumption that like it takes all of the people who escort basically everyone in mechanical up to this detention center a mere matter of hours to get everyone up 100 something flights of stairs.
no, John's and they were so old.
I guess
It
so.
takes
And there
them
are no
so
old
long.
people in mechanical.
None, not a single one. I don't know. Yeah, it's very much like Westeros used to take a lot longer to get
Hmm.
around. It certainly doesn't. It seems like it's not that case anymore. I feel like it's just a little bit of that. I'm okay with that. I'm fine. I would rather the show's already stretching out plots far longer than if we had to be like, well, they're 40 floors away. No, thank you. So I don't mind it, but yeah.
Yeah. So talking about Pete's death overall, I mean, again, it's a little tough because I had wagered, which ended up being correctly, that despite the size of this cast, this is a group that they would want to largely keep intact going into season 3. So I didn't expect
Mhm.
anything major. I would have thought maybe more than one. Do you have any feelings one way or the other? We talk about how we like the gesture itself and the moment from the character, but I mean, what do you think about the fact that he
Um,
is the kind of the only one to actually kick the bucket this time around?
Yeah, I mean, my sense was it was like one from each side, but that didn't end up being true. Basically, get one from the rebel side, and ends up being like just yeah one of the supporting characters of the show. But I do think the reason I'm okay with it is because it's one of the strongest connections to Juliet, who I think is like obviously our main character of the show and will be so impactful in terms of her coming back. I mean, she literally says this episode like my dad's over there. So I do think it's like impactful enough. And I did think if any side was going to lose, it would be like you think that this is was I saying this last week? It's a classic wrestling thing of like the
Mm,
side that's about to lose, the side that like going into a pay per view. Often the good guy loses, so that their win means more when they win at the big pay-per-view. So this is basically that, like they lose somebody in effort to like eventually be the winning side. So I think it's enough for me. I sometimes do wish still probably like shows would take a like bigger swings and somebody's off the show, but that's their job, Mike.
Yeah, it just happens. And look,
yeah.
there is a little bit to me of cauterizing the wound, proper enough for a doctor, of like, this man has undergone so much sadness. I'd rather, if he has to either die and not risk being even sadder, maybe that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. It does come, unfortunately, at the ultimate irony of like, not only is he dead, he's been blown off the face of the map. But what I do think is interesting as well is, at least for me, when I saw that one of those raiders looking over this large gap, it reminded me of Juliette making her way into the floor that the vault is on in Silo 17, which I think is a great representation of, okay, that is the worst case scenario of what can happen to a silo. And Silo 18 is starting a lot of the initial characteristics that could get you to that state in a post-apocalyptic setting, baked within a post-apocalyptic setting in and of itself.
Yeah. I think the visuals again on the show, I mean, like have been quite strong. I think it looks quite stunning. Looks quite good. So yeah.
Well, let's talk about what's going up top, because that's basically where we're going to spend our time for the rest of this episode. And let's talk about what happens, Grace, when Bernard takes a big L. And, maybe this is different from the way he usually reacts when he takes his L's, which is usually like anger and just trying to brain blast as much as he can as to how he could spin what happens next, because Lucas is going to approach him and basically kind of pass along this virus, right? This like laconic type of attitude of nothing really matters. Everything you think you've been doing is at the whims of something nebulous behind the scenes. It doesn't mean anything because we're all dead anyway. And so Tim Robbins' performance basically turns ghost-like, despite the fact that he doesn't actually die. His spirit does. And it's represented almost immediately by the fact that he slowly just shambles his way up those stairs, and will for the rest of the episode.
Yeah, the image of him sitting sort of alone in like the sheriff's office, I feel like is really powerful.
Well,
just, like,
with the exception of like that one poor guy that he has to stay behind.
Oh yeah, this is the one dude. He just looks so dejected, and then almost like I think it's fitting in the sense that he sits there like not really doing anything, but also not really doing anything to like to like. It's almost like if you could just stay in this moment, maybe we'll all just like pass by. Maybe the rebellion will stop. But like, it's almost like he can't quite like let go of the power like that he held. Like he doesn't, do any of the things that might, he locks himself in a room and sits there and hopes that I think maybe it will sort itself out in some way as he's thinking about what's happening, until ultimately he hears Juliette is back and decides to go outside to pay her a visit. So
see, that's interesting. I think almost the exact opposite, in that Bernard is now going through what basically every other character has been through when they first saw that page, or when Patrick Kennedy told them for the umpteenth time about the display, which is this idea that everything you have been led to believe from the first time that you were so granted, the opportunity to be born, to the existence that you have now, to find out that everything you've been working towards has not served the purpose that you thought it did, and might even be entirely for naught, is absolutely enough to break one's spirit. And the bigger they come, the harder they fall. The higher up you are, the farther you fall. Whatever metaphor you want to use, Bernard was the guy who prided himself on always being in the know about each and everything. When Lucas is like, "You're not going to believe this, there are 50 silos," he's the douche that says, "No, actually, it's 51." Like, this guy was quite literally the keeper of the keys, who felt like he was the most powerful man because he knew the most. And what happens when the man who knows the most does not know everything, and in particular does not know one particular thing that makes him realize that he is as much of a cog in this machine as everybody else? To me, Grace, this was like a demigod realizing that they are half human at the end of the day, that he thought he was in this holier than thou position in the entirety of the silo, only to be hit with A, you're not that special, and B, you're trying to protect people from something when really we might just gas you all at the end of the day because this has gotten too out of control.
Yeah, I think it's the latter thing. I think you're more right than I was just thinking about like clinging to power. I do think you're probably right that this is a man who's realizing that like he never really had any power to begin with. As he sits there and realizes that uh he has been lied to, that because in his mind he, I was really resonating with this thing all season of Bernard as a villain who doesn't trust any of the people in the silo to make decisions that are good, and he's almost like, I have to make decisions for you. It's very much like a parent child dynamic where like it's like not giving your child any autonomy or authority to be like, no, you don't know what you need or what you want, and realizing that like even if he does all that stuff, they might just, somebody else who's more in charge might just end it all. I do think that's what he's sitting and grappling with. I do think it's a really good performance, and you feel it when he's talking with Juliette, when he's having the conversation with Juliette of saying like these like none of us are worth like this whole thing that we built is not worth protecting. It was all a lie anyway. So yeah.
So, looked like, Grace, we were about to face the worst case scenario because Patrick Kennedy had the ears of the people, and all of the good guys were being overwhelmed. They didn't want to go outside, but there was this group that's saying, no, like, we all saw the display, right? Juliette's alive. Let's all see those clear blue skies. And so you think for a second that Bernard's nightmare scenario would come true, though at this point, he basically feels like he's sleepwalking anyway. But right in the nick of time, the nickels of time, here comes Juliette over the hill. Luckily, she does have the kids paint a message saying, like, just to not get our signals crossed, it is not safe to come out here. It's fine. It was a double bluff. The display is not actually a lie. Let me in. And so, I thought for a second when the airlock ended up opening, right? When she tried in vain to replicate what happened in Silo 17, I thought it was going to be an instance where, and maybe it was for a second, where Bernard was going to come out and kill her, though she does point out, like, if you wanted to kill me, you could have just shot me right here, right then.
Mm-hmm.
I thought for a second it would have been that she was too late, and like, Patrick Kennedy had already forced the doors open and shoved Bernard through there or something as some form of punishment. But it allows this face-to-face meeting of these two. And I think the staging of the scene is so on the nose, Grace, of the fact that just due to the stairs lowering into the ground and into the silo, you have Juliette standing above Bernard, who is at his weakest at this point, is sort of at his most mild-mannered, who is holding a gun to her, but even she's like, yeah, you're not going to shoot me. It's absolutely fine. And she comes in with far and away the most information that she has ever had in this world. She has kind of gone on her own walkabout, learned a bunch of stuff about the silo to the point where Bernard tries to do his classic Bernard of like, no, you don't understand. Only I know what's going to happen. She's like, no, yeah, you're going to fill it with poison gas. Yeah, I've been there before. I did the lore dump. It's fine. And so it does show how she truly comes back, despite the fact that it has been probably only a short amount of time since she first left. Quite the changed woman.
I think the safeguard stuff, I don't think we needed. I guess it does. We do need to like have her have information that he has, so they can be like in equal footing in terms of, I feel like if that's seen, if he has more information than her, then it's sort of, you'd have to word it differently, I guess. But I do like the setup there, even like her moving forward. It's a little tropey, but her like literally lowering his gun to like, not shoot. It is good. These are, for my money, these are two of the better actors on the show too. So just getting a scene of the two of them chatting, I quite liked this moment, even if I don't love that like we end it with them rushing back into the airlock that gets set ablaze and don't know what happens.
Yeah, I don't know if we needed that cliffhanger. I think the bigger cliffhanger is like, again, for me at least, that the impetus of these people is now going to be Juliette essentially doing the Audrey stuff was the beta test of what's going to be the larger rousing speech, which is, hey, I know you just spent an entire season trying to fight Bernard, but actually Bernard's going to be one of our closest allies because he's the one that knows the most information, and we're actually all going to work together as a silo to try to save ourselves. Like, that's how I imagine we're going to move forward. So if they're trying to use this as a fake out of like, oh my God, did Juliette and Bernard die in the fire? I don't think that's actually going to happen unless they really stun us. And like the first episode of season 3 is Bernard like put his body over Juliette's to protect her, and he ends up sacrificing himself and, immolates essentially.
I just don't know why, if you're gonna do that, why you didn't just do it in this episode. I feel like that's more powerful, but that's where we leave things. I mean, the other piece of the equation, I guess, in this whole thing is Bernard having made Sims, I guess, officially I guess he has two shadows,
let's
I
talk
guess.
about
Yeah.
well, Lucas, remember, quit. He said
Yeah, that's right.
basically finding out what the safeguard was the reason that Judge Meadows quit. It's the reason why I quit as well. And it is interesting. I didn't even think about the fact that when you map Meadows' malaise prior to season 2, now it sort of does make sense that she kind of has this F the world, let's get high, of like, well, none of this even matters at the end
And
of the
why
day.
she wants to leave. That's why she wants to leave so bad.
Yeah, like, oh, listen, let me get out of here before everyone gets poisoned because things are just spilling over too much. Like, now, what I really like about this twist is that it does make a lot of Meadows' maneuvers make sense, even though we, like, just only recently got to know the character before she was killed off. And so it'll be interesting to see if Lucas approaches it differently. Then is he also like, listen, I don't really care anymore? Or is it the fact that, assumingly due to the fact that everybody is going to know this information, that it's going to more so pump them full of, vigor and less so of ichor?
Yeah, I mean, I do. There's a thing that when we were talking about The Last of Us, that was a show that I thought was so good as you were watching it. And every subsequent episode would often make me be like, oh, it's going to be so fun when I go back and rewatch it, because it added to a thing that happened that's prior. There's like a whole thing in that season with Joel that I feel like once you learn some information, it recontextualizes his behavior earlier. And this is exactly that I don't know that I'm like super itching to go back, but I do think to give the show some credit in ways that I've been critical of it. I do think the Meadows being one of the people who knew about the safeguard, looking back on her character and the way that she was, I thought it was very well done as it happened, but I think it's like extra good now that we have more information to contextualize why she was acting that way. So I think that was all really strong. I do feel like Lucas kind of gets the most short end of the stick here in this
comes full circle.
He just goes, and like, not that I hate that he goes and sees his mom. That's fine. But he basically goes and sees his mom. They chat. He gets held up at gunpoint by Sims, tells Sims to go to the vault. And that's where we basically leave Lucas. So,
Yeah. Well, let's talk about where we leave Sims, because again, I really feel that season 3 is all going to be about trying to get everybody on the same page. But I feel the most rogue element might be Sims, or at least one of the Sims, because again, if the idea is to oppose the algorithm, because when they talk in the silos or in the legacy in the vault, Sim says, "I want to save the silo," and the algorithm replies, "Well, so do I." And so
right.
I think it's going to become kind of a battle of those two whims, despite the fact that it is the same statement. But what's interesting, Grace, is the algorithm says, "Okay, I'm going to help you, but it's only going to be for Camille, and the two of you can leave." What does that mean? Is it that Camille will become sort of like the envoy here? Could we go full sci-fi where she like becomes a walking version of the algorithm? Or is it more so that like she's being held hostage by the algorithm and whoever's behind it and is like, hey, you be our puppet and stop whatever's going on or we'll kill your wife?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing about the silos is that they like obviously are okay with destroying silos, destroying full communities, full civilizations that live within the silos. But obviously that's not ideal. So the more that they can do to make sure that they don't have to use, like, the safeguard is a safeguard. It is not, it's not plan B. It's definitely not plan A. So trying to figure out how to like, I feel like where the infighting within silo 18 will be moving forward is what can the powers that be, so the ominous powers, do to restore the rule. Like, is there a way to like pull back on whatever type of rule they try to do now that they've overthrown the current ruling faction? How can they regain the sort of like fascist style, like withholding information, keep people in the dark style rule? And yeah, potentially you see that comes through. Maybe Camille is seen as that person. I just think they can, like, from whatever they can see, they can probably understand that like even Sims might not be like he might be too on the nose in terms of like evil ruler, you know? So,
Well, that's the
you
thing
know,
is that one of the last things that Bernard is going to say when he makes Sims his shadow, right, was like, you were loyal until you weren't. So
right.
is that a test for Sims almost that the powers that be have seen of like, the Sims is inherently out for himself. So like he will be loyal to us to a certain extent. And then if he realizes that there's something better for him along the way, he will clearly ditch us in a second.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm kind of one of the things I'm most interested in is like how much communication was there between Bernard and like like these ominous figures. Like I want that's the thing I'm interested in for a season 3 of this show is how much more information does he have, or was he really kept also pretty much in the dark?
All right, Grace, I want to section off the way this season ends separately from a lot of the main discussion from this episode, not only because of the chronology of it all, but because it does contain a lot of speculation from a book perspective. So, any other things you want to say specifically about anything in Silo 18 or 17? Any other stuff you wanted to point out from these storylines or speculate about moving forward?
No, I think we hit on pretty much everything that happened in Silo 17 and Silo 18 before the big moment at the end of the episode.
Yeah, so call us James Taylor because we say fire and then we see rain, which was probably our first hint as to the fact that we are not in Kansas anymore. We are actually in Washington, D.C., as a rain splattered street takes us into a very different final scene. This is a date, or is it, between two characters. They are discussing an incident that happened a short time ago where supposedly a dirty bomb, which is a radiological weapon, was unleashed by Iran in Washington, D.C., which has caused these like heightened security protocols. There's a reporter who is trying to look into it by interrogating a certain congressman. And for the majority of this, and maybe people still are, they're like, what does this have to do with anything? And then in Grace, we close on a familiar sound and a familiar sight as the theme song plays over the gift that this congressman gave this reporter on their not date, a Pez dispenser. And if it wasn't confirmed before, it certainly is confirmed now. It is the much talked about before times on Silo.
Yeah, so we're flashing back to at some point, and you know, before any, presumably before any silos are, if not built, at least not lived in by necessity. So yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I think we can talk broadly about what we saw. Again, there's a lot of canonical stuff from the books that are baked into this. And to be frank, I don't think we would be doing discussion of this sequence a service if we did not bring that in. So we'll do a little bit of non-spoilery speculation for a few minutes, but then
Mhm.
we will properly brief you that there will be a spoiler section that does give away stuff that happens in the book, so that if you don't want to know, if you want to check out the books in the interim, you can certainly hop off. We'll give you proper clearance to do so. But Grace, give me your first reaction here. Overall, without getting into too many details about the implications, what did you think about this as an ending to season 2 just in general?
I think it's okay. I like it, but I think it's like it's not quite enough for me to feel like it's worthy of the last moment of the show. I almost wish that we were like, I really do think like this show is Juliette's show. This is the Rebecca Ferguson show. So I kind of wish we ended on her, but we don't. We do end here. And the thing I kept saying throughout this season is like one thing I think the show has done pretty well is there's very clearly a giant mystery to the show. It's the first thing that I think like when you pitch this show as a mystery box show is like, why are people in silos?
Mm-hmm.
That's the big mystery. And I feel like the show has done a very good job at keeping our attention on other things. Well, to be able to like avoid answering the question of like, why are they in the silos? Like, I think that like there are shows that have struggled with this of like, once you start to dive into the central, if you dive into the central mystery too much, you then have to start doing like other stuff and it feels a little convoluted. I think the show actually, for as much as I have issues with the pacing of the show, has left this big mystery, I think, to a good time where basically not only the end of the season, which is exactly halfway through the show, whereas you can now envision that we will get more of this for next season. These actors aren't like huge superstars, but Ashley Zuckerman is in Succession. The other actors have to pull up her
Oh,
name
he was
again.
in Succession. I like was really trying to put two and two together.
Yeah. So, like he's been on stuff before. I think he was on Designated Survivor as well, the Kiefer Sutherland show. So, like, these are not like complete nobody. Like, they're not like the biggest stars in the world, but enough that I guess you could see that, like, it does feel like to me these people will 100% be back for season 3, and we will be flashbacking to the beginning of, why the silos might be created.
Yeah, so now I'm really putting it together in my head, and I guess he has a type because for those that don't remember, Ashley Zuckerman plays Nate, who is sort of like a political advisor and Shiv's boyfriend in the beginning of Succession. I believe he also played Robert Langdon when they adapted The Lost Symbol on Peacock as well. But yeah, I mean, what I like about it is that, again, I think we have like permanently shifted the viewpoint of the series in these last couple scenes that, again, I might be completely wrong here. They haven't filmed season 3 yet. They could completely throw everything out and decide to change this perspective. But from my POV, what they're going to do is now more so turn the focus of their ire from, okay, we're all fighting each other, to we're fighting whoever is the one responsible for all this. And so it makes sense from my perspective to then shine a light on those who are responsible for this. And so from that perspective, I think it really did a great job of being able to segue naturally into, okay, let's find out a bit more about this, and especially displacing us in a completely different place in time, ironically enough, despite the fact that it looks like basically our modern world. I think my minor nitpick is that it felt maybe a little too slim, that it felt like we were really trying to put a lot together as to, okay, who are these people? What's going on? I could have wanted maybe a little bit more of a teaser. I mean, maybe this is ironic coming from someone who loves Lost, and they typically would do these like big WTF twists at the end of season finales that didn't really have any context and sometimes didn't moving forward. But it took me a little bit to mentally piece together how they may be connected thematically. And it would be nice to have maybe gotten a bit more of an introduction to these characters and how they could be involved in things outside of, okay, this lady is holding a Pez dispenser that looks a lot like the one that started this entire thing.
Yeah, I would agree. It's a little light. And I just want to mention, this is Jessica Henwick, who plays the other person. I think she's probably most known for being Colleen Wing in the Netflix Marvel shows. So Iron Fist, Defenders, and Luke Cage. She's also Nymeria Sand in Game of Thrones. And was in Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Wait,
and
so
Matrix.
was she one of the Sand Snakes?
Yes, she was one of the Sand Snakes.
Okay, well, listen, nowhere to go but up from there.
Yeah, she was in the Matrix Resurrections as well as Bugs. If you watch that, so she's been she's around.
Is there like a lead role in Matrix Resurrection?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is like they've clearly hired I think these two people will certainly be like very central to the show moving forward. I probably agree that it's not quite enough, and it's mostly like the substance of the conversation, but I don't know, it's hard to I've now watched it twice, so maybe I'm like having a little bit of a hard time, like, because I feel like, I mean, they do just basically talk about like there's a project and maybe you need to work on it, and there was a bomb in Washington, like is being tested for radiation as it comes to the thing, like feels like the world is like on the precipice of something really bad, and maybe we need to do something about it. So I feel for me, the only thing is like I just felt like it was so different than everything we've seen before, which I guess is the point. I just don't know if that, like, I think I just want to stay on the people that I like. I much would have preferred, I think, a Juliette moment to end, but they wanted to leave that mysterious.
And then with her being like, oh, where's my dad? Come on, don't worry, Bernard. My dad will patch us up nice right quick.
So yeah, I guess they want to leave that mystery, and then they want to introduce this teaser for season 3 and beyond. So it's okay. I'm so interested in whether this worked for people or not, this particular last scene. Yeah.
Well, listen, we are going to get into it from a larger canonical perspective right now. So let my monologuing be a symbol to you all. Get out while the getting is good, if you
Don't
do
get
not...
out, the air's bad.
Oh yeah, hold up the sign. No, not safe. But if you do not want to be spoiled as to the events of the novels on which Silo is based upon, feel free to jump out right now. You can check out stuff that Grace and I are doing. Check out weknowscriptedtv.com. We are certainly out there on those internet streets. We have not blown up our internet footprint like a set of The Staircase, but hopefully I have talked long enough to get out any looky-loos who do not want to know anything about the novels that inspire the hit Apple TV Plus series Silo. And I've been talking even more to get people to jump out. And here we go. Grace, I have seen a lot of people who have read the books talk throughout season 2 as to how is this going to mesh up with book 2. And maybe it's too little, too late, but we took a huge jump forward in introducing 2 very key characters in the second novel in Hugh Howey's series.
So even this last week, there were a lot of people thinking that maybe the second book would basically get scrapped. And the reason for that is that basically the first half of that book, I believe, I have not read it, so I just know.
Okay, so I've read it, so we can talk about this.
But I know what happens basically. That the first half is basically, or roughly, is this character Donald, the congressman, and the flashback story until we eventually then, like, I don't know if first half even is right, but eventually at some point we cut back to Juliette. So most of the second book though is
I'd say Donald. The vast majority. It's right. Cutting between Donald in the past, where he is brought in on this big plan, where he is, as was brought up in this scene, an engineer. So they bring him on for this big project of like, okay, we're going to test these sort of like radiation bunkers that turn out to be the silos. And it flashes between that and then him in Silo 1, which is sort of like the main hub silo that overlooks everything himself, even though he doesn't necessarily remember who he is. And then also a little bit of like how shit went south in Silo 17. That's majorly what book 2 focuses on. What's interesting is that you talk about Hugh Howey doing an AMA. I saw a little bit of that as well. And he admitted, like, we are incorporating things from book 2, but it won't be in as big of a fashion as you may expect, where again, it really just deviated from everything going on that we thought of in Silo 18 in lieu of trying to fill in a lot of this backstory as to who built the silos and where they came from. So what I imagine season 3 and maybe 4 is going to be, Grace, is that we are promptly dovetailing our storylines, much like we did. Maybe season 2 was sort of a test balloon for this, in that I think we're going to be spending a lot of time doing what we think that they're going to be doing in Silo 18, but I think we're going to get a lot of flashback content with Donald and Helen and the like as we find out about the plot to build the silos in the first place, and maybe even in the season proper, what turns out to be a fabricated attack that forces everybody in the bunkers to begin with.
Right. Is the one thing I couldn't really figure out is that Jessica Henwick's character, I didn't really like see that she prominent. Like, do you have a sense of who she's?
Yeah. So Helen, I believe, is the name of Donald's wife.
Okay. Got it.
So she is a very important character, though. Again, when we meet Donald in the books, he was already married to her.
Right.
And so I don't know if we're going to have like a flash forward from this or if we're just going to really take a big step back with their relationship. But she also, without saying too much about book 3, her and Donald do play key roles as well in the quote unquote present day of the silo of it all.
Okay. I think that's I think that I get it. I'm excited by that. Again, I think I keep saying it, but I think the central thing of like why were these silos built to me is like one of the more interesting things from obviously from the show, and you have to start moving in a direction where you get answers to that. And so moving to a story where we're going to sort of like potentially see how they were built. Is like Hugh Howey wrote these books basically like he would release chapters online. I believe he was not I think I'd have to look back up. Do you remember this, when he basically like when the series got bought for distribution, like he sort of like wrote it online, I believe, and like in as these short stories.
Oh yeah, he self-published on Amazon.
Right, that's right. Yeah. And so then he started to add more chapters. I think it's an interesting way to go about like how he sort of wrote the series, right?
Yeah, it is interesting to see, like, was this something that he always had in his head and he just gave himself time to be like, let me flesh it out? Or is it more so a basically, oh, you're picking up my show for another season. Great. Now, again, going back to Lost, now we can talk all about how to build out the mythology of the island. I mean, I will be really intrigued to see how they pull this off because, to your point, it was discombobulating to have such a market shift. I could see a certain faction of the internet, maybe some who again wanted to hearken close to the source material, be like, great, we're finally getting to know this. But I could also see some people feel like this doesn't feel like Silo anymore. Like we're spending
Mm.
half the time in Washington, D.C. in present day. This is not the show that I came to watch.
Yeah. We'll see. I always do think it's interesting. He is so involved in the show. So to me, I feel like that is interesting. Like I talked about this a lot with another series about that where the writer was heavily involved. And it was almost like this thing of like, imagine you wrote something and then they in 10 years time they start making it. You don't think that there's any part of that thing that you're like, yeah, we could do this a little. Like I wish like now that I've written it, I wish I actually did this instead of this. Like I think we all think that that would be true. So the idea that it has to be like completely faithful and true to exactly the way it was written, I don't necessarily believe it, especially if the person who initially wrote it is super involved in the product that's being told in a different medium. So I'm
Yeah.
kind of interested to see where they go. I would agree that I mean the way the second book is that we completely divert from Silo 18 is not happening. Like we are absolutely getting Silo 18 content. I think most notably if you're by this point, there's a we've talked about character death. There is a large number of characters who die in the book who have not died in the show, and so we have a lot of material and a lot of characters that we can return to
Got
and
a
create
lot of
content.
bodies to
We
throw in the
do have a
proverbial
lot of
furnace.
yeah, we do. So yeah, we'll see.
So, Grace, let's look over Silo season 2 now that we are at its conclusion. Despite the fact that the last couple scenes really set up what's to come, let's focus on where we are right now and looking back. I mean, I think I'm speaking on behalf of both of us when I say that this did feel like a bit more of a varied season than season 1, which, despite the fact that there was a lot of questions that need to be answered, maybe felt a little bit more aimed in its focus and how they chose to develop things. I think some common stuff we've talked about was how oddly it was paced. I think you brought up a really great point early on about how it felt like Silo 17 and 18 had to synchronize to a certain point, which now we know was Juliette finding about the safeguard and going over the hill just in time. That it kind of came at the cost of sometimes dragging out some plots in 17, sometimes dragging out some plots in 18. I will say, by and large, I still really like this show, and I enjoyed this season. I would call it a step back. I would not call it a chasm, the likes of the gap between floors 90 through 92 as of now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that there's a fantasy football term, Mike, where it's stars and scrubs, and
Mm-hmm.
it's where you have the best players on the team, and then you just fill in you take the chance on the best people, and you fill out the rest with whoever you can find. And sometimes I feel like Silo fits that perfectly, where it is truly, I think, star performances from a bevy of characters that we get to spend time with. I think specifically for me, almost everything in Silo 17 worked extremely well for me. And so the things that I'm like critiquing, they're very small nitpicks. I have the holes, the paws are not quite as big as the suit that can't be worn.
Yeah,
Bad.
exactly. It's still a
Yeah.
habitable suit. I think
Yeah.
it's full of really great performances. Unfortunately, we lost one in Ian Glenn, but I will continue to say that the highlight of the season for me was Steve Zahn. It was a really tough role to fill in multiple ways. I think him and Rebecca Ferguson quickly became the best duo in the show across 2 seasons. They carried so much of that storyline, even at some points when they weren't really given much. I think he was able to really tenderly play this odd character where really at any point in time he had to be personified as like a little manic, a little dangerous, a little vulnerable, a little childish, a little impetuous, a little sensitive. Like he had to show so many different shades depending on what the scene was, and he was able to just quickly change in and out of those clothes like it was nothing. So I hope for many reasons we get Solo and the kids invited into the fold in season 3 and beyond, because I thought he was just such a welcome appearance here. And I think, again, definitely buoyed sometimes when it felt like things were a little scant in season 2 of Silo.
Yeah, and I do think for as much as I think the Silo 18 stuff was a little weaker, and again, I do think, and I worry a little bit in the sense that I talked about the characters that they've not, because of that, I do think the show struggles the most in adapting and adding content that's not central to the theme, like the content that's written in the book. And so that is a big thing I'm a little nervous about for next season, is they're going to end up doing a lot of that, because by the combo of trying to fill in some of the gaps in terms of like where clearly the second book goes in terms of who it's mostly following, and the fact that we will not, like, we're just going to have Rebecca Ferguson on basically every episode of the show next season, that with a lot of the characters who there is no content to write about because they're not alive in the books at this point. I worry a little bit, but I do think when I look, every time I think I critique the show, I do think I look back and I'm like, oh, I actually don't know that I would do much differently. And I think that that constraint that they put themselves through in season 2, I think that they've realized that they don't have to do the same thing in season 3. If we're not, the problem in season 2 is that you had 2 stories that they wanted to keep exactly on the same time. You likely won't have that same constraint in season 3 if we're doing flashbacks and things like that, where like they can tell that story and get to the time they need to in a way that works for that story without feeling like, oh, only 4 days can pass or whatever. So, and I do like the actors that they've hired, presumably, and you think that we'll likely over the next little while get, if they're going to flesh out a lot of that story, we'll likely get more casting news on Apple TV. So that is a fun thing to look forward to as well.
Yeah, we know Apple TV loves to attract the A-list talent. I think my dream casting, Grace, is that while we're still in the spoiler section, there is like the senator, right, who ends up planning out this entire Silo escapade that has Clancy Brown written all over him.
Well, that's
like,
very fun.
I would love to see that happen. Of course, you and I love talking Clancy Brown in the Penguin, so let's keep on rolling there. And we'll keep on rolling whenever Silo comes back. I believe the plan at the moment is that while they have not filmed season 3 right now, Rebecca Ferguson did say in an interview that the intention was, I think, to film seasons 3 and 4 together, sort of like what they did with Squid Game seasons 2 and 3. So the good news would be whenever season 3 comes, chances are season 4 will be quickly behind it. I mean, I don't know how much longer we'll have to wait. Remember that season 2 came out a year after season 1. So I think we might have to wait until like 2027 at the latest, but there's a fairly good chance we get season 3 in 2026.
That would be tight, but not impossible for sure. Apple TV also can put together a quick production schedule. They're willing to put money behind it, so we'll see. I feel like the biggest thing in terms of like when they're going to film it that will affect everything is Rebecca Ferguson going to do Dune Part 3 at some point, which is still, I think, very tentative. Not that I think it's like it's almost like it's unofficially going to happen, but there's been no rumors about when it would film. But you would think that would take her away from doing anything else. So I would think that they would probably want to start doing it sooner so they don't butt up against that schedule. So I would also agree that we're probably not waiting. Like, I don't think we're waiting till like end of 2027. I would more put us in line with like maybe early 2020. No, I would say like, late 2026. I think 2026 is certainly feasible. Sorry. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, I mean, it could be sort of what we got this past year, right? Which is sort of like an end of 2026 into beginning of 2027 type of schedule.
Right. I think that's feasible.
Yeah, I mean, it's the time of year where nobody wants to go outside. So I think it's that proper mood setting atmosphere.
Perfect.
Grace, this was such a delight. So happy to have you on to talk about yet another show, to have you aboard the Silo bandwagon. You were our solo. You were the new character brought in. And much like Steve Zahn, a lot of commendations for you. So thank you. I look forward to getting to do it hopefully again when season 3 comes around. But we can plug stuff now because we're going to, put this on indefinite pause until Silo comes back. You have plenty going on in the scripted sphere. Is there anything you'd like to plug right now for the listeners?
Well, we're wrapping up Star Wars Skeleton Crew as well. So Owen and I will get together for the finale of that episode. And then other than that, I'm doing the Tastemakers each week. I believe Tara and I will be hopefully trying to do a spoiler section on the Tastemakers each week about Severance, the other Apple TV show that returns. We would like to dive into that.
That's the big plug I will make on behalf of this network, is that if you are missing your S-word mystery box, uniquely created sci-fi adjacent series on Apple TV Plus, check out Severance. It is fantastic. It just started its second season. Actually, the season 2 of Silo finished as that one began. And you have an essential companion piece, in my opinion, with coverage here on WeKnowScriptedTV.com, WeKnowSeverance.com, with Josh, Melissa, and Dr. Amanda. They'll be in your ears every week trying to break down whatever the hell happened. Grace, anything else you'd like to plug?
No, I think that's it. I've been wrote a little bit outside. I'll be writing about Severance on Parade, Mike. So that's very exciting. So check that out.
Yeah. And of course, from my own creative works when it comes to Parade, if you're a reality TV fan, you know that we are starting to swim in it right now between The Traitors, between Deal or No Deal Island, and of course, Survivor is about a month away. And you know, if that and when that cast drops, I will be in there with every single thing you need to know. I will be your legacy, your algorithm, giving you all the information about these people. And speaking of reality TV, I will once again bring up the Reality Flash, which is my new RHAP breaking news reality TV podcast. When something's happening in the world of reality TV, when there's like a cast leak or there's a big moment that everyone's talking about, or if, for example, a contestant of a current show decides to take one of your jokey viral tweets out of context and kind of light the internet on fire for like a 24-hour period, I'll be talking about it and bring you what you need to know. So go to therealityflash.com. Make sure you subscribe to that. Of course, you can follow me at a Mike Bloom type. Grace, where can people follow you?
I'm on social media at Hi from Grace or Echo for Grace. Yep.
Yeah, and listen, not making any promises, but we know The Last of Us, which you mentioned, Grace, is coming back in a few months. Hopefully, one or if not both of us will be back covering that. Very excited to talk about another interesting adaptation of some source material. Should be very intrigued to see what they do with that after such a stellar first season. But regardless, this was such a great time. Thank you to everybody who's been listening along, chiming along the entire time, especially in the comments, either on Discord, YouTube, or on social media, offering your thoughts and theories about the season. Keep them coming because we've got a little bit of an extended off season, especially you book readers. Let us know your thoughts about what you expect to come in season 3 and 4 of Silo as we begin the waiting game. Thank you all again so much for listening. Grace, thank you once more for offering your time and fantastic efforts. We'll be back when Silo returns for season 3 in the distant future. Until then, we're going over that hill into parts unknown. Thanks so much again, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.